This country road is the one Harry Milligan should have driven home on the night he vanished completely. The tale of Harry's disappearance was a simple and short story for many years. Harry had gone riding around town with his friends, scooping the loop, cruising, and enjoying beer until 4 a.m., when the group called it a night and Harry was dropped off at his car. Last seen driving off into the darkness toward his house, Harry and his vehicle never made it home and have never been located. Like most cases where a person is missing with their car, many assumed that Harry would soon be found, the unfortunate victim of a bad accident. But as area ponds and bodies of water were methodically searched and ruled out, people began to wonder, had something suspicious happened to the missing Marine? Despite a lackluster initial investigation and the long passage of time, the story of that night has started to grow and expand. Thanks to a recent push for answers and a reopening of the case, the story is no longer simple or straightforward. More fully fleshed out with motives for murder, it is now a complicated and twisty tale full of rumors and accusations that cast suspicions on those closest to Harry, his family, his friends, and the people that saw him last that night. But can investigators today tell truth from rumor? Speculation from fact? For 40 years now they've wondered, what happened to Harry Milligan? It was a warm summer Saturday, the weekend before the 4th of July, June 30th, 1984. Harry Milligan's last day alive, as best we can tell. The 21-year-old was home for the summer, back from college, and he had gotten a job painting houses. When he got off work that afternoon, he went home to wash up and change. Harry saw his mother, Vicky Milligan, who told authorities that her son had been in an exceptionally good mood. Harry put on a new pair of jeans, a blue plaid shirt, and white tennis shoes. He told her that he was going to go into town to see the guys, but that he'd be around the next day to help lay carpet in their house after his slow-pitch softball tournament. Harry loved sports, football, baseball, and slow-pitch softball alike. He also loved music, and his first order of business was to meet up with his friend Jim at the Western Club to pick up a cassette tape he'd lent out. Lots of people saw Harry out in Albia that evening. At the Western Club and then chatting at the square. It was the 80s, a time before cell phones and text messages. Parties and plans had to be either prearranged or stumbled upon. And in a small town, it's easiest just to flock to a central location like the square, where everyone had already gathered. The people who encountered Harry that night confirmed Vicky's statement that Harry was in a good mood, joking around with his friends, rallying them for their upcoming softball games. Harry was having a good time, and again, the people that he sees report that he is drinking, but not drunk. Eventually, Harry meets with pals at the Waterworks bar. The Waterworks was known as one of the rougher bars around town and was associated with high-stakes poker and drugs. It's here that Harry finds himself playing cards. Some sources report that Harry won a large sum of money playing poker at the bar that night, but no one will say for sure that he did. Estimates ranged from a few $100s up to $2,000, which would have been a substantial amount to take home at the time, approximately $6,000 in today's money. Harry is said to have left the bar around closing with two friends, Steve Rockwell and Jeff Adler. They got a 6-pack of beer and went cruising around town in Steve's car. And I think it's important to note just how small these towns are. The population of Albia at the time Harry was here was only about 4,000 people. And Harry actually lived in nearby Avery, where the population is more like 300. So it's not like there's a ton of activities or things to do in the area. Driving around with a few beers is known locally as booze cruising. It's one of those late-night activities that young adults from small, rural towns are drawn to. Like a party on wheels, driving in circles and scooping the loop was a wholly acceptable form of socialization amongst peers, even if it was likely frowned upon by law enforcement. And maybe that's why the details and exact timeline are unconfirmed and fuzzy. It was late, and the witnesses were drinking. Some sources reported that Harry rode around with Steve and Jeff until 3 a.m. when he grew tired. Others reported that it was as late as 4:45 when they dropped Harry off at his car, a nearly 2-hour time difference. Some accounts even report that a third friend, Doug Maddy, was riding with them that night. But again, this was the 80s, before cell phones, GPS tracking, and Ring doorbells. If Doug was or wasn't there is contested and unfortunately uncertain even to this day. Details that I've included, like Harry's visit to the Western Club or the Waterworks Bar, are ones that were not discovered until many years following Harry's disappearance. One would think that getting the stories straight from the people to last see a missing person would be crucial. But it seems that back in '84, the young friends were barely interviewed, and these final details were ones ignored and overlooked by investigators for years. At least initially, all accounts of that evening agreed on one thing: that Harry's car, a 2-door maroon '77 Grand Prix, was parked at the library. Harry's younger brother Mark later told Dateline that everybody used to park over by the library so the cops wouldn't think you were at the bar. The friends left Harry at his car here, and later Steve would recall seeing Harry's taillights in the dark as he backed out of the parking spot before driving north, away from the square, towards home. Harry never made it home. His family lived in Avery, just 7 miles northeast from here. And it's not a long drive, though it still may have been a dangerous one, in the dark, after a long night consuming alcohol. Harry's father, Leonard, was away for work that weekend. He worked as a railroad conductor, so it wasn't abnormal for him to be away. But when Harry's mother, Vicky, woke up alone in the home the next day, she was only mildly concerned. Harry was an adult who had already lived on his own at college, but it was rare for him to stay out all night long. Harry had made plans to participate in a slow-pitch softball tournament that day, something he was eager and excited to do. He'd even scheduled a makeup game with another team that morning before the tournament. But he didn't show up. Harry was supposed to bring softball equipment that his friends needed to play that day. Harry had been adamant about getting his team to this early game, a team that included friends like Doug Maddy and Jeff Adler, who he had just seen the night before. It was unlike Harry to not be there like he said he would be. It was unlike Harry to miss an important game, one that he himself had rescheduled. Dennis Hollenrink, Harry's softball teammate and college roommate, told Lisa Clote of the Ottumwa Courier that when Harry didn't show up to play softball that day, all I could think of was that he was dead. When Harry didn't come home to help around the house that afternoon like he'd promised, Vicky grew more worried. She drove the route that he would have taken from Albia to Avery, this road, and called anyone that she could think of looking for him. No one had heard from Harry. No one knew where he was. So at 7:30 that evening, Vicky called the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. Friends described Harry Milligan as loyal, intelligent, and kind, someone that always made you feel special. Harry had been born with 2 club feet and was quickly put up for adoption as an infant. Surgery set his feet straight, and he never had any issues with them. In fact, he excelled in sports. Football, basketball, pretty much anything that he set his mind to. Because he was adopted as an infant, Harry never knew his birth parents. Leonard and Vicky Milligan already had 4 children that were grown adults, but they made room in their lives and hearts for Harry. And when Harry was still young, they also took in Mark, a child of one of Vicky's own grown children. Mark and Harry were technically cousins, but they were close in age, just 2 years apart, and they grew up in the same home as brothers. Mark and Harry got along well. They enjoyed playing sports, outdoor adventures, and watching football with their dad. Leonard had been a war veteran and a Marine, and as a 17-year-old, Mark also joined the Marines. Soon, Harry joined as well, as a reservist to help pay for his education. Harry was older, so he went to boot camp first in the summer of 1983. That fall, he enrolled in Northeast Missouri State, now Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. That summer of 1984 was his first summer back from college, and Harry was making the most of it, making money and having fun with his friends from high school. Harry was a grown adult, and for this reason, the Milligan family doesn't think that law enforcement really took Harry's disappearance seriously at first. Mark told Dateline that there wasn't a whole lot of effort put into anything. He said that at the time, law enforcement believed that he might have just taken off, though, quote, Harry was never the type of person who would just up and leave. Mark said, I mean, if he was going to do that, it sure as heck wouldn't have been on a Sunday morning with none of his belongings. The Milligans thought maybe he had been in an accident. Even today, many of the roads outside of town are loose dirt and gravel roads, and Harry had been drinking. How there was no evidence of the large car leaving the road, they couldn't say. Their days were spent searching in disbelief. This pond right here was carefully considered due to its proximity to the road, but there were no broken fences or places where tire tracks departed from their expected trajectory. Multiple searches of this pond have come up empty. At the time, Mark was on active duty with the Marines in California. His mother, Vicky, called and wanted to know if he had heard from Harry. But he hadn't, and after several days of no sign of him, Mark was allowed to come home. The Marines gave him 30 days of recruitment duty, which gave him time to support his family and look for Harry. Mark spoke with the guys that he had ridden around with that night, and they said that they didn't really have any clue what had happened to Harry. The local sheriff's department, as well as friends and family, conducted area searches of ditches, woodland, and nearby lakes. The state patrol and a friend of the family used 2 different planes to search the countryside for Harry, his car, or evidence of an accident, but with no success. The sheriff's department brought in cadaver dogs that found nothing. Harry's good friend Stacy told Marissa Jones from the Vanished podcast that her father, a game warden, assisted in the search for Harry by using sonar equipment in area ponds. Stacy describes Harry as an old soul who enjoyed dancing and being outdoors. Despite going off to different colleges, they had kept in touch after high school. She felt that it was unlikely that he would have just run off and left his family. Though, at some point, this is what she hoped had happened, because it would mean that Harry was still alive. And I think that the Milligans were quietly hoping this too. That same summer that Harry disappeared, his older sister, Charlene, was dying of cancer. It was such a difficult time for the whole family, especially Leonard and Vicky. They were a wreck, Mark said. When Charlene died that August, Harry's family hoped that he would show up for the funeral. Harry and Charlene had been raised as siblings, and the Milligans knew that Harry would never have missed her funeral for any reason. But when the funeral came and Harry didn't show up, they were devastated. It was like having two family members die at once. The family leaned on each other during this difficult time, spending their days looking and looking for that maroon Grand Prix and comforting each other each empty night. Princess, their Brittany Spaniel, would curl up on Harry's bed in the evenings, waiting for him to come home. Harry never came home. However, the family would not give up. They printed and distributed hundreds of posters nationwide and offered a $500 reward for information about Harry's whereabouts. When no substantial tips surfaced, they considered increasing the reward, but were advised against it by Sheriff Carr. Leonard told the media, quote, "He said if they were going to find him, they would find him for $500. If I thought 1,000 would do it, I would definitely put it up." Deputies conducted several interviews, and Monroe County Sheriff Carr told the media, "We have no reason to believe there is foul play, but we just don't know." Which is just sort of painful to read now. Yes, law enforcement had fully pursued the idea of a car accident. They got out all the equipment, put boots on the ground, everything. But when that angle failed them, in terms of considering foul play, they'd really fallen short. At this point, deputies had taken the report from Harry's mother and interviewed only 3 other people that had seen Harry that night. Very little effort was made to corroborate their stories or even establish a timeline for Harry before 2 a.m. Deputies took their word as truth and assumed that Harry had wrecked his car or left on his own accord. But they hadn't really followed up to confirm anything. Sure, there was no reason yet to suspect foul play. But if you're going to talk about it, why not make the effort to find out? And it is here that I actually need to welcome you to Avery, Harry's hometown. This is where the Milligans lived, the house that Harry should have been driving home to. By that winter, tips and rumors were beginning to crop up in the case. Sightings in nearby Ottumwa and faraway Arizona were ruled out. No one knew where Harry was. But in such a small town, there was lots of speculation and lots of talk. Because there was basically no evidence, Harry had just vanished, and not much of an investigation in the first 10 years. Much of the actual investigation now is based on the local speculation and talk. And there are lots of theories and rumors in this case. First, Harry was supposed to attend Marine Reserve training in North Carolina at the end of July. Some people speculated that perhaps he'd wanted out of the military, though his sister Charlotte told the media that he would have never left, and that Harry, quote, loved the Marines. None of his family members believed that he was the type to just run off, and it wasn't something he'd ever done in the past. Dennis Hollenreich, Harry's college roommate, was confident that Harry would have been in touch if he had wanted to start a new life, saying to the Ottumwa Courier, "I think he was unhappy with how things were going at school, but I don't think he'd do that to his folks." Smart and curious, Harry had wanted to study engineering in college, but had not taken the required prerequisites to get into that program that he wanted right away. He had been disappointed. Additionally, Harry had excelled in high school, where good grades came easy to him. But it seems that he had difficulties adjusting to college life. Like many college freshmen, Harry found that having to study for his good grades while balancing a social life and also military duties, it presented a challenge. The poor grades and partying was a source of conflict between Harry and his parents as well. They had argued some that summer about Harry's drinking, and I believe that these arguments were likely the basis of local speculation that Harry was murdered by his own parents. This theory, while difficult to definitively disprove, has been ruled out by most. Harry's father had been away for work that weekend, and while his mother would have been the default disciplinarian while Dad was away, it seemed unlikely that she would have been capable of mortally injuring Harry, a strong young Marine. And besides that, why kill him, the son they chose to adopt and raise instead of just kicking him out on his own? And why spend so much time and money looking for him, raising awareness of his case if they already knew where Harry was? The Milligans were hurt by the rumors, but more so by the absence of Harry. In 1989, Vicky told Lisa Clote of the Atomo Courier, "I'm not worried about going to hell. I'm in it." 5 years later, and the family is still having a hard time coping with the loss of Harry. Getting together as a group is tough without him there. They've stopped exchanging gifts at Christmas. It was just too hard. And it's not getting any easier, she said. They were frustrated about the lack of progress on Harry's case and the lack of assistance from law enforcement, though they appreciated the support of their friends and neighbors. Leonard said, quote, "The community was great and helped look. In fact, I still look." For years and years, the Milligans believed that Harry had wrecked his car and would be eventually found. They thought they would find him piled up in a ditch or a ravine somewhere, but they never did. Eventually, as the years ticked by, they began to consider foul play and started paying attention to some of the other small-town rumors circulating about Harry's mysterious disappearance. First, there's a rumor that the person that owned the bar where Harry had played cards that night was involved in Harry's disappearance. Mike Stalker was only a handful of years older than Harry and his friends, but his father had helped him with the funds to open the Waterworks bar in downtown Albia. The rumor alleged that Mike had lost a considerable amount of money to Harry playing poker, and that Mike, who didn't like to lose, had waited or paid someone to wait by Harry's car that night to get his money back. The fact that Mike had left town in the months following Harry's disappearance was like fuel to a flame. The Stalkers, a family of business owners, had the means and land to bury a car if necessary, and hid Harry's vehicle underground. Or so the rumor went. Eventually, the sheriff's department interviewed a former bartender from the Waterworks bar. He told authorities that he didn't know what happened to Harry, but that Mike Stalker had run with a rough crowd that were associated with drug use and distribution, and he believed that they were certainly capable of kidnapping or homicide. Another rumor that came up early on was that Harry had become involved in a top-secret military operation and left unexpectedly to work for the U.S. government. But this rumor was pretty easily ruled out. The Marines had actually declared Harry a deserter when he did not report to training that summer. As a former Marine, it made Harry's dad, Leonard, furious. He was so frustrated that they were unable to find Harry and couldn't stand that he had been labeled a deserter. So in 1992, they had Harry declared deceased, partly in an effort to eliminate this terrible label. In 1994, 10 years after Harry's disappearance, former Sheriff Carr, who was now working as a private investigator, returned to Albia to re-interview witnesses from the night that Harry had disappeared. He believed that the story told by Harry's friends, Jeff Adler, Steve Rockwell, and Doug Maddy, had changed. Deputies from the sheriff's department had interviewed Jeff, Doug, and Steve on July 3rd in 1984. But again, no effort was made to corroborate their story or establish a timeline before 2 a.m. Even their whereabouts from bar close to the time that Harry was dropped off was unspecific. Now that 10 years had passed, Jeff Adler's story is that Harry had parked closer to the bar and had actually been the one to drop Jeff off. Doug Maddy, who had not been consistently included in this story, tells Carr that he was barely with the group, meeting up with them for only 15 to 30 minutes. And Steve now recalls Harry's taillights fading away to the north, though he had previously indicated driving off to the east before Harry even backed out. These inconsistencies might not have meant much if there had been more details in the initial interviews. However, with only a few things said back then, shouldn't some of those few things lined up? Really, though, what I find most suspicious is the behavior of these friends in the years following Harry's disappearance. While Steve Rockwell had kept in contact with the Milligans, checking in on the case sporadically, apparently Jeff Adler actively avoided the family, refusing to speak with them. Doug Maddy, as well, had avoided any discussion of the case short of a brief interaction when he spitefully told Mark that he knew exactly what happened to Harry and would never tell. After 7 years with the Marines, Mark Milligan came back to Iowa and became a police officer. Because Harry's case was pursued by the Monroe County Sheriff and not the local police department, Mark wasn't involved professionally in Harry's investigation. In fact, to avoid any conflict of interest, if he learned anything about the case, he would just pass it on to the sheriff's office. Still, it meant that he did occasionally interact with people directly involved in the investigation, and that included Doug Maddy. At one point, Mark arrested Doug. Angry, bitter, and handcuffed, Doug told Mark that he knew what had happened to Harry, but would never tell. It's hard to say if Doug was being truthful or just trying to get under Mark's skin. But it's not a good look for Doug, a person that was supposed to be Harry's friend. And Doug Maddy is actually at the center of yet another rumor about Harry's disappearance. This one, that Harry was mistakenly killed by someone who had intended to kill Doug instead. The rumor alleges that Doug was in serious debt due to drugs, and that someone with the nickname Flame was sent to collect. Back in the 80s, Harry had smoked some marijuana recreationally, though he never got into any trouble for it. Doug, on the other hand, definitely did become embroiled in the illicit drug trade. Now, he may or may not have already been dealing in '84, but he was eventually charged with a number of drug-related offenses, including conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamines. I don't really think that Doug and Harry look that much alike, and it seems odd that Doug would still be out there roaming around alive if his debt had been so high back in 1984. But this rumor is another that is difficult to prove or disprove. Over the years, there have been many other tips and rumors too. One woman claimed that her husband, small-time drug dealer Jay Owens, killed Harry. But she later recanted, and her timeline of the events had never really lined up. Perhaps Jay was involved in the murder of Tim Ernie. Tim was a 29-year-old shot to death in the February before Harry's disappearance. At least one investigator speculated that the two cold cases were related, though no evidence ties them together. Eventually, Mark received the original case file for Harry's missing persons case. And though he never knew Harry to not get along with everyone, there was a note in the case file about a bar altercation with a friend that happened a week or so before he disappeared. Something about a basketball team. The note did not even specify who the fight was with, and Mark has been unable to discover with whom or even confirm that the fight occurred. He's asked around, and no one has come forward to admit that they were involved in this altercation or to say that they witnessed it. Mark also learned of a person that possibly saw Harry's vehicle headed south in town at some point that early morning, which is one of the various reasons that many area bodies of water have been searched for Harry's car, not just ones to the north of town or along his route. Dozens of lakes, ponds, and reservoirs have been searched. After 22 years in law enforcement, Mark Milligan left the Ottumwa Police Department and has taken on a more active role as a civilian in his brother's case. He uses social media to ask questions, give answers, and learn more about what really happened to Harry. He's tired of the rumors, tired of the lies, and the false assumptions. Mark seeks the truth, and it seems like he is closer to it than ever before. In early 2021, Harry's case was reopened, and it is now being actively investigated by the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. That same year, the Sheriff's Department followed a tip in regards to the Davis brothers, who may have been playing cards at the Waterworks bar the night that Harry went missing. They brought a cadaver dog to the Davis trailer park and, after a few possible alerts, used an excavator and a backhoe to dig up several areas of concern. But unfortunately, nothing of significance was discovered. Harry's adoption records were unsealed in an effort to get his DNA profile. When Harry's birth mother was reluctant to help, a sample from the envelopes and letters that Harry wrote to his friend Stacy during boot camp were used. Now Harry's DNA is on file for law enforcement to compare to unidentified does or future discoveries. Today, it has been 40 years since Harry was last seen alive. Sadly, Vicki Milligan died in 1994 and Leonard Milligan in 2017, both without ever knowing what happened to their son. Now, Mark heads up the search for Harry, but he's not alone. Mark has built a huge team of supporters, advocates, and investigators. They've put up mini billboards, made t-shirts, bumper stickers, and wristbands to keep Harry's story alive. Mark has also recently enlisted the help of the Chaos Divers, a volunteer team that specializes in finding vehicles underwater. Over the course of several visits, they have searched more than 30 bodies of water looking for evidence of Harry. They've searched new locations and old ones with new equipment, though nothing has turned up. Still, Mark hasn't given up. He very actively runs the Harry Dennis Milligan Still Missing Facebook page, and the Chaos Divers have been in Albia as recently as just last week. So I'm going to include links to that Facebook page and the Chaos Divers YouTube channel in my video description. You can check them both out and stay up to date on the case yourself. There have never been any named persons of interest in Harry's case. 2 years ago, when Dateline asked the Monroe County Sheriff's Office if they suspected foul play, Sheriff Johnson replied only, "The investigation is ongoing." And I think it will be until Mark finds his answer. He told Mark Newman of the Ottumwa Courier, quote, "All I know is that I will never quit looking, never quit asking. I'm not looking for accountability as much as closure, finding an answer. What happened? And where's my brother?" Harry Milligan was described as a 6'1" white male with short brown hair, blue eyes, weighing about 165 pounds. When he was last seen, he was wearing a blue plaid short-sleeved shirt, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes. If you know any information regarding Harry Milligan's mysterious disappearance or his current whereabouts, please contact the Monroe County Sheriff's Office or the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation.